as we move along in this study of very selective men and women of the Bible, we'll take a few minutes to look at a man named Enoch, and then we'll probably spend the rest of the time looking at a woman named Esther. Mainly because there is so much more information about Esther. But Enoch is an interesting character all the same because it should be pretty relevant to our minds because we so recently looked at Elijah. And Elijah and Enoch have a very close connection in that they are the only two people ever to have, as far as we know, to have ever gone into the next life without having their first life end. As crazy as that sounds, they didn't die. They were taken. If you want to call it a shortcut, I don't know if it's a shortcut or not, but it is certainly a different experience. His name means teacher, or initiated, or dedicated. But he was a son of Jared. He was a descendant of Seth, and the father of Methuselah, whose legacy was basically that he walked with God. That's what I would, for Enoch's sake, that is a good legacy to have. Usually his legacy would be he didn't die. He got to be taken. And while that is puts you in pretty elite company, a bigger compliment to Enoch is what we might consider to be the reason why God allowed him to be taken instead of living until he died, and that's because he walked with God. Our book calls him the man who was missed, and I almost changed that. Actually, I did change it, but then I changed it back because I thought, surely we can do better than that. The man who was missed. But the more I looked at the account, I saw more of what was being referred to. So there are only a handful of verses that tell us about Enoch's life. And then there's a reference to him later, in Hebrews 11, looks back at him. And there are a couple of other references to him also. But in Genesis chapter 5, it says, it gives his portion of the genealogy here. It says, when Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch. Jared lived after he fathered Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, again, it says, and he was not, for God took him. That's what the ESV says. It sounds like an incomplete sentence, doesn't it? Enoch walked with God, and he was not. In the way we speak, that would be an incomplete. He was not what? Something's missing here. Well, not necessarily. But your Bible might say, as the Septuagint said, he was not found. That's where the author of our material here is getting the man who was missed. He wasn't found. And that was true of Elijah, too, when it happened to him. There were people who just figured he was somewhere else. God maybe, picked him up and took him somewhere else, but he was gone. They couldn't find him. Same was true of Enoch, apparently. Or it might indicate this. If the sense is truly that he was not found, then that would seem to imply that somebody was looking for him. But maybe it's simply saying that he didn't exist on the earth anymore. But in any case, he walked with God. 2 times in these verses it says Enoch walked with God. And the footnote in my Bible on the first time of those says, or the Septuagint again says, pleased God. He pleased God. So to walk with God would seem to indicate in a spiritual sense, not necessarily in the sense that Adam and Eve seem to have been with God in the garden. Seems to be a little bit more of a literal sense in that. God was walking through the garden in the cool of the day, you know. But in this case, it seems more spiritual. He walked with God in the same way that we could walk with God, and hopefully we do walk with God. And God took him. When we turn to Hebrews 11, even though that's all that is said about Enoch, he makes an appearance there. He gets to be in the hall of faith, or the hall of fame of faith. In verse 5, it says, and by the way, this is the only one that the verb is not in the Hebrews account. Every one of these has a verb that I've pointed out in the past. By faith, somebody did something. Well, in Enoch's case, it's referenced in the passive sense of Enoch was taken. By faith, Enoch was taken so that he should not see death, and he was not found. So there again is, he was not found, and some of the older versions might say he was missed, right, in that place, because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. So Enoch's legacy was really living in a way that pleased God. And when somebody lives in a way that pleases God, they can be said to be they walked with God. That was him. Close communion with God. Separated from the world in a spiritual sense, and then literally separated from the world. And the book, also the handout points out his life was one of progress. And it should be true for us too. Steadily, uphill, steadily, in a good way. Growing. Closer to that goal. And then, of course, his unusual end. Doesn't seem to have been as flashy as Elijah's, but it was still taken. Not as noticeable. All right, I only have one lesson here from Enoch. And we could probably come up with more. But it seemed pretty straightforward to me. To walk with God on the earth will yield the blessing of being with God in eternity. There's great reward in pleasing God and walking with God on the earth. And he came from a time and a place and maybe a lineage that wasn't necessarily one that walked with God, but he did. So there's even a lesson in that. I have the choice of whether I walk with God, regardless of who I come from, where I come from, and so on. And that's that. When the text is as scarce as that, there's not really much else to say, because we don't have any details of the manner in which he walked with God. But with Esther, a little bit different. Got a lot. Well, not a lot compared to some people, but compared to most Bible characters, I would say quite a bit. Mm-hmm.
Back with Enoch,
Mm-hmm.
there's a big difference when you realize that you're with God everywhere you go, and that you talk to him all the time. You know, we sing two songs. One of them is, My God and I go through the fields together. When you stop and think that God is watching you and always with you, it makes a big difference. You don't just drop in and drop out.
Yeah.
You're friends, and you get all the way through.
That is a sort of the significance of that kind of analogy. You're walking with them. It's just as walking with someone literally, physically, except in the spiritual sense. And God is there. He's wherever God's walking, and I'm walking with God, right alongside or behind, following. Yeah, it's not a now I'm in, now I'm out, dropping in kind of thing. It's a lifestyle. Everywhere he goes, everywhere we go. Are we walking with God? Because we're either walking with God or we're not walking with God. There's only two options. We're on one of the two paths.
See, there was our mother's favorite song. In fact, at the church, and the people gathered at her party that she could not go to And it's her prayer would always be, and God will bless you if you go with him all the way to the end.
Yep. There's no other option but blessing if you go with him. And Enoch is a good example of that in the most extreme sense, because he literally he was taken. God took him, it says. All right, Esther is one of the notorious, infamous characters of the Old Testament history. She had two names, actually. Esther was actually her Persian name, which means a star, which it has been said implies good fortune. But her Hebrew name, Hadassah, meant myrtle, but she's not called that. Hardly ever. Maybe just the one time that it mentions her name in chapter 2, verse 7. She, of course, was the young Jewish girl who lived during the time after the captivity, who eventually became the queen of the Persian Empire and ultimately saved her people from destruction. That's her legacy. A pretty big one, which is why she is so well known. She's the woman who saved her nation from genocide. We learned quite a bit about her in general, even physically. She was very beautiful. She was very humble. But first, it's her beauty that's emphasized in the context of being chosen for the running of being the new queen. She was very beautiful, above pretty much all the other young women, and so much that the king was pretty much immediately drawn to her over the others. But it's not her physicality that is what's so amazing about her. It may have been amazing, but it's not what is to be remembered about her. It was her character, as with all of these. Character is what matters. And her character was quite impressive, especially for somebody in her position. And sometimes we probably observe it shouldn't be this way, and meaning no offense to some of you people who are beautiful to look upon. There's a trend that physical beauty tends to lead people into vanity. And it's sad that that's the pattern, but we've all seen it at some point in our lives where people maybe get a little full of themselves because of their physical endowments, their God-given gifts of physical beauty. And as such, that translates to spiritual lacking. But Esther, sometimes we say you can't have it all. Esther did. She had the character as well as the intelligence, as well as the good looks. She had it all, as we would say. But it's a compliment to her that she could be beautiful to the extent of being singled out with all the other women, but then among them, she's being singled out as more beautiful than them, better than them, and yet all the while she maintains her humility and never forgets where she came from. That's another thing that we probably can point to several examples of people who get fame and they become a totally different person. And not just fame, but maybe power of any kind. Maybe they're elected to a political office or promoted to, head of the school board, or, some power can go to people's heads to the point where they don't even remember who they are. They're a totally different person because it went to their head. Esther had that too. She had power. She was elevated to the queen of the biggest empire the world had ever known up to that point. And she never changed. And that, I will say, is just as much as a compliment to her, is a compliment to Mordecai, who raised her, and whatever role her parents, I forget, does it give the exact age when her parents died? Or I don't remember an age being given, but regardless, if it does give an age, if it was old enough for her parents to actually have a role in her spiritual life in the early days, it would be a compliment to them too. But it's definitely a compliment to Mordecai because he would be responsible for a lot of the way she is. Sometimes we let things get to our head that shouldn't even, not even worth getting to our head. It's like, why would we be so proud of ourselves for that? She was the queen of the biggest empire in the entire history of the world. But she doesn't seem to have ever changed because she had a good heart. And she remembered who she was. She remembered her people. And she never lost her humility. And she also, as we know how the story goes, stepped up to let herself be used as an instrument of God's purposes and will. And it's probably worth making note of the fact that she is a good example of what it means to let yourself be used by God. Because, yes, that's a passive voice kind of thing. I'm letting God use me, but how do I let God use me? Well, how did Esther let God use her? Okay. Yeah. I guess that's a part I skipped over. Her devoted preparation, took it very seriously. But practically, how did it translate? In what way did God use her? From her perspective, she just did it. She did what she could do, and what she did was serving the things that she did was working in the service of God's plan or will. So it wasn't so much, okay, here I am, God, use me. Here's the strings, Okay, here I go. I'm letting God use me. She just did what she knew she needed to do, and that was working to fulfill God's purpose. But all of it, God was overseeing all of it. Yep.
Well, I think every person is placed here for a reason and a purpose. And I think with what Mordecai told him, who knows that you're in this position for this very reason. In other words, you look around and you figure out where you are and how and what you can do to further God's kingdom. I mean, if you're Lisa, who placed her there, and for her to realize that you're placed there for a reason.
Yeah. And that's what Mordecai tried to get her to see, and she did, it seems, see it. At least she did it. She acted according to that. So she made the right choice. Even though Mordecai said, hey, if you don't do it, God's going to find somebody to do it. God's going to do it somehow. But wouldn't it be great for you to do it? You could be the one. And not in a puffed up, arrogant way or prideful way, because she didn't have any of that. She simply took advantage of her position to facilitate the deliverance, the salvation of God's people at that time. She allowed herself to be used. Got several lessons for Esther. So this will sort of balance out only having one lesson from Enoch. But just in further of our discussion, these lessons probably could guide us in that. Number one, Esther's record abides because she was one who kept her pledge. So the only reason that we even have the book of Esther, and not just we have it, the only reason the book of Esther, the story of Esther even exists is because Esther kept her pledge. She kept her word. She was true and pure in her carrying out of what she needed, what she was going to do, what she said she was going to do. If Esther had ignored it and gone with the other option of, well, I'll let God sort it out, God's more capable than I am, so I'll let God sort it out. None of this would have happened. Now, there may have been another story telling how God saved the people, but it wouldn't have been this story. So yeah. Yeah. So he even brought that up to her mind, yeah. So that could have been an unintentional encouragement to not do anything. She's like, well, when you look at it that way, like you said, God will do it. But no, she understood, or at least perceived, that it would not be right for her to not do it, because she was convinced, by Mordecai probably, that the fact that you are now the queen of Persia in this unique, unparalleled position is evidence that God's going to use you. He wants to use you to bring this deliverance. And she did. She lived up to that, kept it. Joe, do you have something else?
It's an ongoing discussion in Christians, and especially the church. People who were born, like us, in the United States, were born into freedom, and with that was a responsibility to govern ourselves. And then a lot of Christians go, well, God will take care of it, and just be hands off. And that is not what the Bible has ever taught. You're not supposed to be entangled in all this stuff. It's not supposed to take your first priority. But it's kind of like when he said, I'm going to give you the land, he still expected you to go fight and do it.
Yeah.
And like you discussed with faith, he's offered salvation, but it's up to you to accept it. And we were blessed, so grateful for freedom to worship and teach our children and teach what God wants us to teach. And so therefore, it is a responsibility as a Christian to help the world around us in that way too.
Yeah.
Politics is very good. Somebody's going to clean it up, and it has to be us.
Yeah, but it's about the way we clean it up, because there are many, many avenues that a person could take, and not all of them would be good avenues. But we can help clean it up by continuing in what we're supposed to be doing anyway, which is a lot of what we talked about this morning, and preaching the word, standing firm in the word, and being ready to give an answer. All of these things will contribute to, it will have an impact on the political landscape of our culture.
If people know the truth, they won't be given strong delusions and become
Yeah. So that's how Christians can help the spiritual and political turmoil that we're seeing, is by doing more of the same thing that we would do anyway, or that we should be doing anyway, in carrying out our mission on this earth. Just maybe a little bit more loudly, and directly, openly. Desperate times call for desperate measures, as they say. But that's not to say doing wrong, or to get mixed up, confuse political and spiritual things, because they are not the same. They may have a thread that goes between in both, but they are not the same thing. And sometimes we do more harm than good whenever we put more emphasis on the political side than the spiritual side, and then don't get anywhere.
Did you know the phrase, no one cares unless you know, or really know how much you care?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things our society has lost has been respect for life, that it belongs to God, and how precious it is. If you don't take care of the unborn, and you don't take care of the old, that's better.
Yeah, innocent life especially. And that is a very touchy subject, because it does toe the line between moral and political. And if we're not careful, we can get sucked into a political debate on that subject. And strictly speaking, there's no real way for the pro-life side to win that argument, politically, because the political argument is the government shouldn't be able to tell us what we can and can't do. And then it becomes well, I think it should, and then you don't get anywhere. What really, the truth of the matter is what should be emphasized. Life, innocent life, we don't have a right to take it, to take that. Irrespective of anything else, that is a human life, and an innocent human life at that. And it would be immoral to take that life. If you are disgusted by the prospect of taking that life, then don't get yourself in a position where you have to make that choice. So all the political angle of it is really nothing but a distraction. Simple as that. About making it personal and making it all emotion. It really comes down to teaching people not to take part in things that will get you impregnated. Yes. So that's where the choice is made. That's the choice. Yes. Your body, your choice, you're absolutely right. You chose for your body to now have a baby in it. And just because you regret that happened doesn't mean you have the right to kill an innocent person. And when you look at it that way, it's pretty obvious. You can't kill the person that impregnated you. That'd be wrong. But you can kill the innocent byproduct, the innocent creation. So it always should go back to the moral side. And I would say not the Bible necessarily on that particular subject, because those people, they don't care what the Bible says, and you're not going to find anything about abortion, strictly speaking, in the Bible anyway. Find about killing, but it's really. Yeah, well, once it gets to that point, there's nothing else to say. Science, that's where I would take it. Their side is always about following the science. Well, if you want to follow the science, it's a human life, because science says that at conception is when the human life begins. The life begins, and if it's a human, if it's inside a human, it can't be anything but a human. So human life begins at conception. So it still won't work, but that's the place to take it. Yeah. Yeah. This is just the maneuvers that human beings will do to not accept a truth that they don't like. We make up things. We make up our own delusions. It's just a blob. And therefore, I'm not really taking a life. So it's just, I'm going to block out all the facts just so I can, what's the end game? I just want to be able to do whatever I want and not have to suffer the consequences. That's what it comes down to. So it comes down to depravity all the same. It's sexual freedom without consequence is the end, is the game, is the end goal. For most people, I think there are more sinister motives for being pro-abortion among some of the higher-ups, but we won't get into that. Yep.
You know, what you rob yourself of, even if you go to political science, and only humans can experience the concept of awe. Our God is an awesome God. When you look at the clouds and you see the sun rays behind, and you recognize the awesomeness of the world around us, and even, with those little lives, it is awesome. And as you notice, they may look like their parents or whatever, but they'll come with a personality of their own, something God gave them, a soul. That, if you ignore that, you miss some of the most beautiful things that this life has to offer. The awe of it all. That's sad.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is. Number 2, how commendable it is when young people revere their parents and obey them in the Lord. course, Mordecai wasn't Esther's father, but he pretty much was, practically speaking, and she respected him and obeyed him. Simple as that. Number 3, we should seek divine guidance in times of difficulty. I would probably say in all times, at all times. Seek divine guidance to know what is best. And going back to the topic we were just talking about, that would be one of those times too, to seek divine guidance, and it becomes pretty clear at that point. Number 4, we should obtain a knowledge of human nature so that we may know how to take advantage of any circumstances which may favor our cause, if it be a proper one, if it's a good thing. So learning as much as we can about as much as we can, so that we'll be able to take advantage of our whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, like Esther did. She was more or less plucked up from where she was and just inserted into this totally this unknown world, and yet she was so wise in what the steps she took, and she knew the best steps to take. She didn't just burst in there and hope for the best. She planned, she prepared, she was aware of things that maybe not to do and to do, and the master of the eunuchs or whatever helped her with that too, about these are the things you want to do. It's the more we know about what we're working against, the more effective we're going to be when we try. Number 5, we should be ready when necessary to renounce self and exert ourselves for the good of others. Esther did that. She was she was risking her life because the penalty was death for what she did. What she did was a capital crime. Shouldn't have been. And it's borderline, deification of the king in itself. How dare you come to the king without the king telling you to come? But she risked her life for everybody else. There is still a chance Esther would have been spared, even if Haman would have gotten his wish. She would have been the last Jew to be killed, probably, even if she would have, once it was found out. But she did it for everybody else, for her own people. Number 6, we should value and seek the cooperation of fellow believers, just like Esther did, which applies to all these, by the way. We should have unbounded confidence in God's providence and not undervalue small things. This is kind of what I was alluding to with Elisha's ministry. God cares about the small things too. He cares about the little things, the things that we would consider unimportant. God cares, and they might make a huge difference in the big picture of things. Number 8, we should acknowledge God as the author of all mercies. Number 9, we should recognize the transitory nature of earthly grandeur and the end of all ill-gotten earthly power and possessions. Esther, like I said, she could have let all that get to her head. I'm the queen. And don't you know, it probably has gotten to a lot of queens' heads. But not her. She understood, just like Moses did. All this is fleeting. It's nothing. It's worthless in the end. So I'd rather go and suffer with the people of God than enjoy these pleasures for even a little while. Number 10, even as one who had climbed so high, Esther maintained and cherished her humble roots. I've already pointed that out. Number 11, and these last two kind of go together. All around us, no matter how insignificant our environment may be, there are magnificent and unparalleled opportunities of serving God and a needy world that even angels envy. No matter how small or insignificant or unimportant we might think our situation is, all around us there are opportunities. Everywhere. At every corner, every turn, there is an opportunity of serving God in some way. Not the same way in all points, but in some. We should look at situations like this. Here's something that I'm going to be doing, a regular daily appointment of some kind, everyday appointment, going to work, whatever it is. In what way might I be able to serve God in this thing? There's going to be something. There will be a way, whether it's talking to somebody about these spiritual matters, or doing a good deed, showing some kind of example. I mean, there's something. If we'll just see it, we have to recognize that it's there. And finally, we should serve the Master to the limit of our ability, wherever in His providence He has placed us, and thus prepare ourselves for a larger circle of service if such be His will. This is where I'm talking about the little things. Start small. If you try to start with the whole world, you're going to be intimidated, and then you're going to do nothing. But if you start small, let God use you in a small way, small scale. Almost everything starts out with a small scale, doesn't it? If somebody invents something, if somebody builds something, you start small, and then you do the big thing, the real thing, however you want to put it. Well, spiritually, it could be the same. We start small. That's why I point out the fair, the exhibit. It's an easy opportunity. And that might be a filter, then to go, an avenue to go after the fair. Now I know what it feels like. I know how to do the thing. Now I just got to do it in this other setting, this other place. And just serving in whatever capacity, just like if a young man becomes a Christian and he wants to serve in the worship, he may not want to preach, fill in preaching or teaching or something, but he might be okay to lead a prayer or something. That's a perfect place to start. Read the Scripture. Perfect place. But the aim is not being content with that, always wanting to progress. You do the small things, but with the mind of, I don't want to be doing the small scale forever. I want to go bigger and bolder if it's God's will. So that's the point of that final lesson. Preparing ourselves, wherever we are, you work to your limit, to the best of your ability. And by doing that, you're preparing yourself to work to the best of your ability in a bigger setting, in a bigger circle, if God puts you in that bigger circle. And I have no doubt, we don't meet Esther until she's planted in the program of the young virgins. But I have no doubt that she was the same kind of young woman wherever she was before, in her small circle, small town neighborhood circle, that prepared her to be the Esther that she needed to be when she becomes the queen of the world, basically. And we should do the same. Prepare ourselves. Wherever we are, there's opportunities. So work, just like Jesus said, the fields are white already. Just need workers. Just need to get to work, get busy. And then worry about progressing on to the bigger things. It could be just one person, by the way. So if you want to, how do I start on a small scale? I identify one person that I think might be even remotely receptive. Start with them. It's just one person. You don't have to go in and say, "Hey, everybody, I got something to say. Listen." That's not. And again, I would discourage anybody from doing that, because that's not going to be very effective, because it's going to catch people off guard and be like, "This is strange," and the whole talking point will be, "That was weird, wasn't it?" And it won't have anything to do with what they said. But try to reach one person. Work on them secretly. Try to prime them for step by step for maybe receiving the truth. Yep.
It's also good to start with children, because children will learn, and actually children can teach you a lot. I was uncomfortable with that number for knowing human nature. I don't know what that meant, but it's kind of like if you work with children, you kind of learn a lot about other people before they attack you or whatever, when they get older. And if you teach a child young, half the time you listen, you're not sure what they hear, but
Yeah. Well, as far as the number 4 about human nature, I don't really like the terms human nature either, but I would say get to know the way people are, which really is human nature. But even on a more personal level, get to know how people are in general, and then how these certain people are, so that you'll be able to most effectively deal with those people, just like Esther knew. Yeah. Yeah, I become all things to all men, so that I might save some.
I mean, obviously Esther was maybe late teens, so she wouldn't have been exposed to a lot of the wisdom of the world.
Yeah.
What she knew was God and what he expected of his people. She knew that.
But she also knew her husband, the man who was basically she was made to be his wife. She knew him and his nature, and she knew the nature of the people that she dealt with regularly, so as to most effectively take advantage of, to take the right steps, rather than just going in. She put thought into it, and that's sometimes where sometimes we get stuck on we give it too much thought, so where we're stuck in an eternal planning phase. But then other times we do the opposite extreme of no planning, and we just bolt in and then end up again not doing any good. But if we put, that's part of putting all your effort into it. Putting the best of your ability is, I want to make sure that I make the right step, or the best step that I can make with every step. And part of that process is knowing people, who they are, how they are, and the kinds of things that might reach them that maybe won't reach this person, but I got an idea of what might reach this person. Like Paul said, we destroy arguments and lofty opinions. So that makes it on a personal level. It's not just barging in and saying, Jesus was crucified for your sins and he's the Lord of the universe now. What are you going to do about it? That element is universal to everybody. But how can I approach a certain person with the truth that they need to hear in a way that they will be most likely to receive it? I'm not responsible for their reception of it, but I am responsible for my presentation of it. And if my goal is for them to receive it, if that's the ideal goal, then I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the way I'm presenting it is a way that will have the highest chance of them receiving it. So that part's on me. Just like anything we do, I want to put as much planning and thought into it so that when the day comes, I will have the greatest chance of success. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, they've been there. Yep. So there's the encouragement in that to do it at all, and then there's, well, the wisdom and insight of, well, here's what I did. You know, somebody that could say, well, I'll tell you the way I did it is I did this. And again, when we treat Christianity in one sense, the way we treat everything else, it becomes a lot easier. It makes it easier for us because we get in the habit of, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, of putting it in this category, that this abstract and difficult, mysterious, foggy category of, I don't know how to do this. Nobody can do this thing. It's impossible what we're trying to do. But if we just treat it like everything else, I'm going to plan, I'm going to think ahead, I'm going to consider my approach. I'm going to consider how I'm going to make sure that I react to any potential reaction in a positive way, in an effective way, and all with the aim of keeping in mind the goal my goal is not to win an argument, but to win a soul. And that once we get that into our heads and hearts, the presentation will almost take care of itself, because we won't get sucked into an argument, because my goal is not to win the argument, but to win them. And a lot of times, if you win the argument, you're probably not going to win them. If you don't misunderstand me, but if what you're trying to do is win the argument, yeah, you might win it, but you're not going to, you're losing the soul for the sake of winning the argument. But if we approach it from the perspective of, I want to win the soul, then you may not even try to argue. You'll just maybe be more patient. Like, okay, I don't want to go down that road. I'll come back to it at another time. You're not going to see Jesus arguing with people very often, even when they're wrong, which they were. If they ever went against Jesus, they were wrong. But he didn't always argue. Sometimes he just let them and let the seeds sink in and be planted, because sometimes that's all we can do.